Hi everyone, Sajid Amit here, and welcome to my review of what I think is going to be one of the best IEMs of 2024 by the time this year is done and I do my end of the year sort of ranking of top 10 IEMs, because this is perhaps the best IEM I've heard as of June 2024. And guys, I have nothing to gain from hyping this up. A lot of you who have reviewed this, I mean, not a lot of you. I think there are about three or four reviews on HeadFi. And of course, there are more owners than this. I know the owner, Jedrek, who's a wonderful guy. I think he's based out of Poland. This brand started in 2019 out of Poland. And some of you on the water cooler thread, some of the more veteran type members who have tried this before me have, talked about how amazing this is, how this is this all-rounder that I think has ruined other IEMs for you. And because this IEM universe is so saturated, I know it's very difficult to sort of, it's difficult to know what to expect. It's difficult to think that this will actually beat other IEMs, and there are plethora of wonderful IEMs in the world. The world of Summit-Fi IEMs is just so saturated, guys. There's so much out there from Unique Melody. Unique Melody comes out with one IEM every week. I mean, of course, I exaggerate, but they keep coming out with these wonderful IEMs a month after month. You have these classics from, Aroma Audio. You have classics from Oriolas. You have so many wonderful IEMs that were released in CanJam 2024, which I took part in. And there is this other IEM that I'm waiting to review. It's called Ruby from Eminent Ears. The Flip Ears Aurora XXIV was amazing. One of the contenders for, one of the best IEMs this year. So there's so much going on this year, right? There's so much that has come out this year. And so much came out last year. Last year was particularly amazing for IEMs. So in this sort of crowded milieu, I'm just very impressed with this one. This is the Craft Ears Omnium. It's a tribrid. But unlike most tribrids, which have ESTs and dynamic drivers and balanced armatures, this is a different kind of a tribrid because this has a dynamic driver, this has a planar for mids, and this has one BA for upper mids and 4 BAs for highs. And the highs here are done exceedingly well, but the mid-range is the star of the show, which is saying a lot. Please bear in mind, I'm not a mid-head. I mean, I'm someone who got into the hobby on the back of a Sennheiser HD650, so I do know what great mids sound like. Of course, I do. I've reviewed over 200 products. But I just want to say that over time, I've sort of vacillated away, or just sort of moved away a bit from mid-range oriented IEMs, because you take the Oriola Straley, for example. It's very mid-rangey. The treble of the Traley is sweet. The Traley is just famous for its mid-range. You take other IEMs or even headphones like ZMF, which are famous for their mid-range. So I haven't always gravitated towards mid-range oriented tunings. ZMF is probably one exception because I really like their mid-range. I think it's super cool and super classy and super organic. This is one IEM that blew me away from mid-range, guys. It just blew me away. And I'll talk about all that. So this again is a 7-driver tribrid. It's from Craft Ears, which is a wonderful boutique brand from Poland, founded by Jedrek, who's wonderful to talk to. Jed is someone I've kept in touch with over WhatsApp. I understand that Jed was initially a drummer, a music composer, and a producer, so he does bring in some amount of understanding of what recorded music should sound like, right? I'll talk about his FR in a bit, its frequency response, and then I'll talk about its technical performance. But just a bit more about Craft Ears. So Craft Ears has been making a lot of IEMs. Their most famous, I think, consumer-grade IEM was the Aurum, a tribrid, which was very well received by the market. Aurum was priced at about $1,400. They also offer a slightly more affordable Argentum, around $700, and an IEM called The One, which comes in at $850. So this is their flagship at $2,500 or 2,500 euros. And my goodness, is it a flagship? So to talk about tonality and FR, the bass is interesting because the bass has a mound, it has a slope, but it's not as bassy as Harman, which people keep calling neutral. And because more mainstream, more reviewers with hundreds of thousands of followers. See, I'm a bit of a niche reviewer because I focus on TOTL stuff, and I'm more of an audiophile sort of, consumers reviewer in the sense that I haven't reviewed any sort of, headphone product for gamers or I don't do much hi-fi. I stick to the high-end stuff that I personally would buy, and I do buy most of the stuff that I review. So I still, despite having around 9,000 followers, I do consider myself more of a niche-based reviewer. So, I mean, if you look at most of the other reviewers, like most of the mainstream guys, right, they stick to Harman, and they sort of, Harman's the mecca for tuning, and Harman is like neutral. Harman to me doesn't sound neutral. Harman sounds bassy, it sounds closed in, it sounds a bit too forward in the upper mids. To me, Harman is very colored. Now, that's the reason why I think the word neutral should be used with some amount of caution and with a lot of disclaimers. So for me, this sounds more neutral than Harman in the bass because it's not as bassy. What is interesting about this bass is that somehow I feel that it's more cable sensitive than a lot of other IEMs. Like this cable you see here is from Astral Audio, which is a magnificent brand based out of Hong Kong. This is their logo, right? You see this sort of arrow kind of shape, or A. It resembles the letter A. So this is the copper cable from Astral Audio, which just sounds amazing. It's called the Pulse. It's a pretty high-end cable, but it's less than $1,000. And I have talked to the manufacturer, and he claims, and I do have reasonable grounds to believe him because I've heard most of the high-end cables on the planet, especially from the more established brands like Effect Audio and Elatech. And I know what those cables sound like, and his cables sound as good as any other cable on the planet. And our friend here claims that the maker of Astral Audio claims that the connectors he uses, the insulation he uses, and even the quality of the copper cables and the wires he uses are just of a much higher grade. And he showed me other high-end manufacturers sort of wiring and stuff, and he just was showing me how his are better. So I do think his cables deserve a shout out and deserves a look. Astral Audio from Hong Kong. So I'm pairing this with Astral Audio, and honestly speaking, this is not just for this review. I do like this IEM with Astral Audio copper cables. I've tried it with the silver. I've tried it with the stock cables. So overall, it does sound pretty good with the stock cables. It sounds amazing. I just think it sounds a bit better with this upgrade cable. So with the stock cable and with this cable, it sounds similar in the sense that I do think copper cables have a way of bringing out a little more sub-bass impact with this IEM. And it tames the treble a bit. Not that the treble needs taming, but more on the treble later. So the bass is a little more neutral than Harman. It's a little more balanced between sub-bass and mid-bass than Harman. On certain cables, like the silver cables that I've used, the bass sounded like it lacked just a wee bit of sub-bass impact. However, with this, it was completely fixed. I mean, it wasn't like it needed fixing. I mean, to give you an example, it has more sub-bass than a Focal Utopia. It's got impact, it's got depth, it's got, a right amount of growl. And very interesting, it's got texture. So I do give it high marks for bass. I would give it an 8.5 if you're cabling it right. For the sake of an example, I would give the Treble something like a 7 for bass. Okay, now moving on, the mid-range here. I mean, people have compared the mid-range with the Susvara mid-range. Do check out the Headfire review section for this. It's a planar mid-range, so of course it might draw comparisons with Hyphaman mid-range, which Hyphaman does a nice mid-range. If you look at the Aria mid-range, it's very classy, yet it's a bit thin, and it's very resolving. It's very nuanced, and the microdynamics are off the charts. If you look at the Susvara mid-range, it's a little warmer than the Aria mid-range. The Susvara mid-range is ever so slightly more organic than the Aria mid-range, and a little more resolution, a little more nuance, vocal inflections. You hear Chris Cornell breathing because he's got a very airy, breathy sort of a voice. The Susvara mid-range doesn't fare as well with singers like, the former lead guitarist of Stone Temple Pilots, Scott Weiland. And Scott Weiland has a lot of beautiful tracks. Barbarella is one of them. And if you listen to the track Barbarella by Scott Weiland on Susvara, and Mr. Weiland has a very baritone, deep voice. And Susvara doesn't capture that very well because even Susvara has an ever so slightly thinner mid-range. This is a very interesting take on planar mid-range because it's more of an Odyssey LCD4 crossover with Susvara kind of a mid-range because I mean, it's not fast to the point that it's disruptive or it's timbrally off, because this to me is one of the most coherent tribers I've ever heard in my life. It sounds like it's one driver. But the mid-range is still extremely nuanced. It's extremely nuanced. Like, I don't think people who buy this and people who like mid-range and all-rounder IEMs will ever sell this. Like, that's as much praise as I can give it for mid-range. Like, this IEM, the Jewel, is one of those IEMs I haven't sold, and I don't think I'll ever sell it. I'm a huge buyer and seller. This is one of those that I think you'll find it very difficult to sell because of its mid-range, which is saying a lot because I'm not a mid-head. The mid-range is not overly warm. It's not overly analytical. It's not overly organic, if you know what I mean. It's just right. And I think where it becomes a winner is the technical performance of the mid-range, which is just so nuanced and so much microdynamics. And even the imaging, like the separation between foreground, and I know I'm cutting into technical performance territory here, but I do think that they're very difficult to separate. The mid-range is, in terms of a separation between foreground and background music, is something that I haven't experienced ever in an IEM. It sounds like a headphone in its sheer ability to sound viscerally separated with regard to foreground and background images. Now, finally, moving on to treble, guys. I mean, I've given it a lot of high praise. This is the Flash Acoustics tie clip, which is very nice, which I got with my Catalina cable, just as a segue or as an aside. But to come back to its treble performance, guys, the treble performance is just astounding. It's got treble, it's extended, it's airy, it's got lower treble, so you get a certain amount of attack with electric guitars, and cymbals do announce their presence without sounding too present. I mean, Jedrick is an interesting sort of a guy. I mean, I don't know him that well, but I just marvel at how, I mean, he's humble. He's supremely humble. Like, I've never seen him not be humble. I've never heard him not be humble or kind or polite. And he does this. And most manufacturers who do this level of work turn out to be assholes, honestly. He's not. He's just a very kind guy. And to some extent, I mean, guys, a message to Jedrick is to become a little more of a mean person, because this is just way too good. And he's too nice to, sit on an IM like this and not be meaner. Of course, I'm being sarcastic. This is just to call out a lot of manufacturers who produce amazing things and just somehow become stuck up, somehow become arrogant. And perhaps this is more common in the headphone section of the hobby, and a lot of Summit Fi headphone manufacturers become arrogant. And some of you will know what I mean. But Jedrick is amazing, and this mid-range and treble are amazing. The bass here is solid. And so you sort of see why it has 4 ESDs for treble and 1 ESD for upper mids, because upper frequencies are just rendered ever so perfectly. They're balanced, they're clean. Now, its crystalline clean feature is one of its trademarks, because no matter what IM you've been listening to, when you shift to this, you'll get more clarity. That I just can give you in writing. Although I'm not giving it to you in writing, I'm just speaking. You can write it down. Guys, this has so much clarity. Like, this would put the final Audio 8000 to shame. So that's a segue to technical performance. And I know clarity is not just a function of resolution. Clarity is also a function of having a boosted treble or boosted upper mids. But this doesn't have a boosted upper mids. This has presence, but it's not as boosted as Harman, which is an awesome thumbs up for me. And mad props for having an upper mids that's not as boosted as Harman. But the clarity here is class leading, and I do think the quality of the driver and the circuitry has a part to play in this, because the upper mids are not as boosted, and it's more clarity than a lot of other IMs that are more boosted upper mids. So clarity, and then resolution wise, like I said, the mid range is just extremely resolving. The treble is extremely resolving. The bass is very resolving, and it's very coherent. It receives full marks for coherence and timbre, because you don't hear a planar timbre. You don't hear any mismatch or incongruity or lack of cohesion between the different driver types. The different driver typologies come together to produce a very, very coherent whole, guys. So the timbre here is class leading. Stage wise, like I said, the foreground and background stage is very good, especially with regard to separation. And soundstage width is also very good, but I've heard other IMs that are wider. So it doesn't sound as wide as, let's say, the Jewel does, which of course is a $5,200 IM, but the Jewel is uniquely wide sounding if you know how to tip roll and cable roll and amp it right, or drive it right rather. But this is plenty white. This is like in the top 25% or top quartile of white sounding IEMs. This wouldn't be in the top 5, of course, top 5 IEMs that are white sounding. But of every IEM ever produced, this would be among the wider sounding ones, with among the deeper sounding ones. So there is absolutely no flaws I find with this, guys. I mean, even the aesthetics are amazing. I mean, this is carbon fiber, not as from some gimmicky carbon fiber sort of a design. It's actually carbon fiber and gold plated rims here. And these have wonderful isolation as well. It's worth mentioning because these earbuds actually go somewhat in. And I do like these double flange tips that they come with. Guys, this just sounds amazing. I mean, if I do some comparisons, I do think it's in a similar class to the Aroma Audio Jewel, which is a $5,000 IEM, so at half price. You do get value at $2,500 with the Craft Ears Omnium. This could be one of the best flagships of all time, especially if you consider value. And even if you don't consider value, again, I do think it's one of the best flagships of all time. Like I keep saying, this could well turn out to be the best IEM of 2024, although I'm yet to hear a bunch of others that are en route to me. But I do think it'll certainly make, or I'm quite sure it'll make the top 25 sort of, or top 5 rather, top 5 IEMs from Amplify from 2024. So, I mean, I do think it does, I mean, you do well to pair it with a warmer source. Like I'm using the Sony W1ZM2 and it does sound majestic. I can warm it up further with the PB5 Osprey from iBasso, and it sounds richer with more organic overtones. So yes, I do think I have found, or even maybe I'd like to say mastered the chain for it, and I've spent some time thinking about its chain. I was lucky to have this in my arsenal. This I got. So do spend some time tip rolling, cable rolling to figure out how you like its sound, because it will change its sound in ways that are meaningful. Overall, guys, amazing IEM as may be evident. I rate it highly. If I had a star rating system, this would get a 5 stars, guys. No ostensible weaknesses. So that's it for me, guys. I hope this was useful. I'll leave a link to this if you want to get in touch with Jedrish to buy this, or you can get in touch with me for further questions if you have more questions about this. And do feel free to engage each other or me in comments, and I'm pretty responsive to your comments. I hope this was useful, and stay tuned for my next one. Bye bye.